Hello and welcome back to the Fifth Trooper podcast where we talk Legion. Today's a very special day. Well, for me anyways, it's our 20th episode. And with that, I have my man Evan, who usually joins me. Say hello, Evan.
Hey, how's it going?
And we got a special guest, Kevin Valliere of imperialdiscipline.blog.
Hello there.
Hey man, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back on. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And for those of you, we've been playing this game, it seems like, on all the podcasts now, where we're like trying to reveal people's real names and their like pseudonym, their tags online. So for most of you out there, if you don't know Kevin by his real name, he goes by GroggyDog on the Discord channel.
So. That is correct.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Oh, thanks.
So today's podcast, we got some cool stuff. We want to talk mostly about Terrain. We're going to cover some of the Discord channel and the Gavin Team League. And then we also have a special interview today, too, with Shawn Morris, which I'm really excited about. And so let's kick it off. So number one, for those of you who have heard us talk, you've heard us talk about the Discord channel, the Legion Discord channel. Well, Kevin's now one of the admins.
That's right.
So how's that been going? I know it's only been a couple weeks, but you doing okay? You keeping your head above water?
Yeah, I mean, I think between being an admin and having my own blog, I can, I'll be able to retire any day now on funds from.
It's finally coming together.
Yeah, exactly. I am weeks away. No, it's good. They were really nice to welcome me in, and they've continued to be nice to me, and it's a pretty easy community to moderate. Fortunately, everyone's really great in the Discord, so it's a real pleasure to be part of the team.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier, like many episodes ago, about how I was really encouraged by the community as a whole. And that seems to be carrying over. I mean, we all have little blips here and there, right? And we've had ours, but I think 95% of the community has been wonderful without any issues.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said for the Legion community. Yeah, I really haven't had too many tabletop experiences, as we talked about last time I was on, but I really enjoy just hopping on Tabletop Simulator, or whether it's in person with my friends here in New York City. This feels so much like a social game, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think the advent of Tabletop Simulator has really kind of made this into, I think, this is my personal opinion, made it bigger faster, maybe, is what I want to say, than maybe the initial game would have been without the Tabletop Simulator version.
Sure.
But yeah, so cool. So we, so the next thing I want to talk about, Gavin Team League. So we're into round 3 now, and we got our pairings. We are up against, what's their name? I think we're up against the Good, the Bad, and the Just in Time. So we're vying for last place.
Got him. Long con finally pulled off.
I mean, I've been pulling my weight.
Look, 1-1, all right? Take it easy.
But yeah, it's been interesting. But I think it gives you a chance. I'm not worried about the last place, because we're like, Evan's been playing some really wacky skew lists, which is fun. And our other buddy Jeremy has been too. So I think that's been a lot of fun to just like walk in. Like, Evan, your last game you walked in with 2 ATSTs, which is ridiculous. So
yeah, wacky skew list, not serious at all.
Yeah. Evan, I'm so sad that I missed that match. Double ATSTs is my dream list. If I could make one list in Legion just really good, it would be double ATSTs for sure.
I finally got to kick a Luke Skywalker to death with an ATST, and that's all I really wanted.
That's the dream for an Imperial player.
The season's over. Like, it's good, man. I got what I wanted out of it.
So my favorite part was in the chat. So I was in the chat watching Evan's game, and literally people are like screaming in the chat, "Kick Luke! Kick him!" And there was like thunderous applause as he did. So if anything, that part was really good.
I'm a folk hero, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's right.
That's all you need.
Yeah, and I think, it's been interesting because I don't know why it's different, right? But like a lot of the people that were doing well in the first two Invader leagues aren't doing as well now, and it's kind of a shakeup as far as who's doing what, um, as far as tabletop simulators. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's always I'm always surprised by what the meta ends up being. I think every time we've gone into one of the Invader League seasons or even Team League, I expect one thing, and as the season comes out, there's always those lists that just come out, and I, I'm not sure if I have one specific example in mind for this season, but I feel like there's so much creativity when you've got the tabletop simulator to just sort of do whatever you want, and it's been good. It's been good, I think, to sort of push the meta forward a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it gives people an opportunity to play with stuff that's not out physically yet too, so you kind of get a feel. Even though we're missing some of the cards and stuff, but we can, like Chewbacca and the Wookiees, Imperial guards, we were all able to play with those long before they were released.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, and it's funny because Notorious Scoundrels, yesterday's episode, they had on the Impact X guys, so they had Freeman and Talk Polite on LJ, and LJ brought up a good point too, and this has always been my thing with TTS. Like, it's a great, don't get me wrong, great practice, but I think it's impractical sometimes because when you're trying to eyeball like distances on TTS, it just does not work. Range does not work eyeball wise the same as it does in real life.
Yeah, definitely. I ran into that problem a lot when I played X-Wing and would practice a lot on Vassal. I get really good with the list, and then I try and play it in real life, and suddenly would be running over asteroids. I was so bad at eyeballing stuff if I had only practiced a list on Vassal. So yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I think Evan, I mean, you always say that about X-Wing too, right? Like that's like one of the hardest things to learn about X-Wing as well is eyeballing range.
Oh, it's everything, especially with 2.0 out now. But I agree with the Legion thing. Like, actually, my biggest thing with TTS is the tables are so awesome, like the terrain, and I'm making lists for the tables I normally end up playing at, which is kind of barren, right? Like the minimum 25% of the field, but it's all like tubes and house shapes, not like forest areas. So I'm always like, when I bring that list that's good on TTS to a table, it's usually a completely different experience for me.
ATSTs always seem to do a little bit better in my local meta than my
Sure do, yeah,
tabletop
man.
simulator
There's
games for
been
that same reason.
this TTS thing's been pretty shocking with them. I'm like, oh, trees again? Why are there so many trees? I know how
Yeah.
they felt on Endor.
Yeah, and then those rivers were tripping you up,
Oh, dude, I was
so to
so mad. I'm
speak.
like, what do you mean this is difficult terrain for an ATSD? I can step over this.
Yeah.
I can physically put my model over this.
Well, I think it was Nerfly was hosting that, and he said I think he designed that one, and he's like, I gotta change that. Those shouldn't be difficult terrain. And I was like, come on, why right now while my guy's playing on it? This is bull crap.
I'm like, oh, I guess I'll just do a one for. It's fine.
But yeah, so that's been going good. So anybody out there, if you haven't had a chance, highly recommend to at least here's my view is I've been getting into it heavy probably the last month since the Yavin based team league started. I've been playing all the time on Tabletop Simulator. It's just a great way to get practice in and just to like remember rules, and it's just good. Kind of, I think Freeman put it like muscle memory, right? Like building your muscle memory.
Yeah, and shout out to Tyrion as always for being so quick on the turnaround with new units as
Oh,
soon as they're
yeah,
announced.
she's like
And
immediate.
yeah, and shout out to Endless too. His stream from like day one has come so far, and he's doing a really great job between the team league and just streaming in general. I think it's been hard to figure out streaming Legion, and he and the Invader League channel have really come leaps and bounds in how they're doing it.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I like, I mean, not just because I've been on there, but I like that he's been bringing on different guests and like he has somebody new doing the stream with him. So you're not always, like you get somebody like, honestly, I'm goofy when I'm on the stream, right? And I'm just ridiculous and say crazy things. But then you'll get somebody like Talk Polite, where he's very analytical about the game that's happening and kind of walking people through it. And so I think it gives everybody like a real rounded view of the community and how we all view the game, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, well, let's talk to that a little bit. So, Kevin, we know your blog, and for anybody out there, imperialdiscipline.blog, it's great, great resources, great just conversation
Thank you.
starters. Let me ask you this, because back when we first talked, you and I were kind of in the same boat where we were like, hey, we're just happy to be playing. Like, this is a fun game. Like, just, yeah, Legion, woo. I've found myself starting to get increasingly competitive, like, almost in a bad way, where I'm like, okay, I gotta win. Like, I'm gonna win this. Like, I'm taking it very seriously. Like, all the games I have and stuff. Have you found yourself changing at all since you've been diving deeper into it?
I go back and forth on the actual gameplay. There are times where, for me, it's just fun and I enjoy it. And then, I'll have a time where, I played 2 tabletop simulator games in the last 2 days, and I'm really into trying out lists and seeing what I can do. I think for me, more the pleasure that I found is really trying to push myself when it comes to like better painting and better terrain stuff. I've never been that super analytical person. I really enjoy listening to people who are, but I think for me, pushing the creativity side, I really, and Shawn Morris is coming on later on. He's a great example of people who are really pushing the creativity for the Legion community. And so I think partially out of necessity, because I would lose every major competitive game that I went into, just because it's new to me still. I really enjoy working on my skills as a creative person in Legion.
Yeah.
But I'll pretend all day that I know what I'm doing when I get on Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah, I'm like having this. It's funny because I've been talking to some of my friends about, like, I've been having this internal struggle inside of me, because like the whole point of this blog, or this podcast, sorry, is to have kind of like be like an approachable podcast for everybody, like from a beginner to a more advanced player. Like, anybody can listen to our podcast and find something, hopefully, that attracts them, to the podcast. But like for me, like I've just been becoming like way more serious about the game. And so my impulse has been like the last couple episodes, we've gotten a little bit deeper into like Notorious Scoundrels territory. And I gotta keep like pulling myself back and going, no, 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 that's not me. Like, I'm the artsy fun guy that likes playing this game for fun,
Right. Yeah, and Evan, maybe you sympathize with this, but I think the big shift in my actual gameplay in terms of becoming more serious was having to choose to abandon the ATST. Like, I want it to work so bad in a really good list, but I'm looking more at Death Troopers. I'm looking more at Strike Team and Royal Guard, and there's not really room for ATST anymore. And so I think that's sort of the first casualty was the ATST, which I love so much.
I just like it because I know it's an infantry game, but I like vehicles, man. I think like a tank or something looks cool, and I like the fact that there's not a whole lot, so it's not like Imperial Guard spam in 40K where it's just nothing but tanks. But on that side, like no one plays vehicles anymore because they're all kind of bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not statistically, but like maybe an ATRT here or there, but no one plays a T-47. No one plays the ATSD, and I think they look awesome on the table. B, they're just thematically cool. And C, like you should be scared of an ATSD, but I've had 2 ATSTs shoot at 1.4 cannon for 2.5 turns and finally kill it. Just due to average 3 hits, and he's getting like medium dice. That feels real bad.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I should look at a group of rebels if they're on the open, just evaporate them. And after I roll the dice and I get my 2 rerolls, I'm like, with your light cover, that'll be 1 hit coming in, and that feels real bad for 250 points to just not perform the way I think it should.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. ATST feels like the sort of last remaining viable vehicle. I know there's still some lists floating with like naked ATRTs and a few other things like that, but even speeder bikes feel very much like they've gone the way of the ATRT. With so much sharpshooter out there, that cover 1 is useless now.
Yeah, this next list I've got is either I might just go full Weiss and just say to heck with it. But I actually think a naked 195 point ATST might be okay if you just go for kicks and punches with his.
Hmm.
So I really need that super cheap commander to come out, the 50 point generic, because my goal is to make a just generic army with no heroes, and see if I can get the ATST to just be okay for just a big body.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost seems weird because, like, I wonder too. And Evan, I was really excited. I've been talking up that list to everybody that you were telling me about. I think we talked about it last week on the podcast, where it was, I think you had like 11 activations with an ATST, and you had the DLTs. Like, I didn't feel like you sacrificed anything for that list, and you had an
Yeah,
ATST in it, and I was like, holy crap, this is really good.
the only upgrade I think was just the DLTs. I think like a Zerg form of Imperials could be good. But I really actually the sad thing is like General Veers being that extra like what 40 some points over like the generic commander that's promised around 50, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
I
Yes,
think.
something like that.
Actually kind of holds back some of like the upgrades you want. But I'd like just to feel like it's like 11 activation. Everyone's got like either their extra guy or the extra gun. Nothing crazy, but it's 11 activations with like an ATSD, I think 2 DTLs, 2 snipers, 4 troops with DLTs. It looks fun, just something different. I'm kind of getting a little burned out on the Imperial like Vader or Palpatine and like full like a 8 activation list. I think there's more room to experiment.
There's been a lot of talk in chat recently about the sort of impending evil twins list with Krennic and Veers, and I'm psyched to sort of mirror the Rebel, Wonder Twins list, but with Death Troopers. I think that's going to be a blast to play. It's like real like plotting and effective, but not particularly flashy.
Oh yeah, I've pre-ordered 4 Death Troopers and Krennic. It's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really interesting, and I think we've talked about this a couple times, but I think it'd be cool to get your opinion on this too, Kevin. Like, I don't feel like there's any meta right now. Like, I think there's good units, okay, and I think that there's good miniatures. Like the DLT-19 is a fantastic for the points, but like I don't feel like there's a true meta right now, and it just feels like the Wild West again, where anything could be possible.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. When the only truly non-viable unit is still that airspeeder, and so many new interesting things have come out, I think you've got to say that it's in a good place. There's perfectly good ways to run e-webs. I still don't own an e-web, and I've only played one on TTS once, but there's still plenty of people doing really great stuff with those and laser cannons. I think some of those early lists still work reasonably well too, like some of those early Wonder Twins lists. Um, and yeah, I've been so impressed by the lack of power creep. I know you mentioned the Notorious Scoundrels podcast, and they were talking about that too. How that's going to be inevitable at some point, but I feel like they've done a really good job managing it through some of those core requirements and just the way they've released units.
I
Well, and
enjoy the fact that you don't feel outbought. Like if somebody puts down
Yeah,
two ATSTs like myself, doesn't mean anything. If somebody just has a core set with like 2 bikes, 4 troops, and Vader, they're probably just as good off as the guy with the 2 ATSTs are.
yeah. I feel like the strike teams right now feel like the only really indispensable unit. I can't remember the last time I saw a really competitive list without
Very
one,
much so. Yeah.
but outside of that, it's wide
yeah,
open.
I've been thinking a lot about that, the sniper units. I don't even know. Like, Evan and I always talk about, and Evan always brings up the point that, like, listen, I mean, mine is pull the strings now, but really you have 6 activations, right? So you're going to be able to attack 6 times. And generally, I would say maybe out of those snipers, you're getting 3 wounds, maybe
Hmm.
4. And what they're doing is they're kind of board control more than they are like wounding people. So like I have a list for team league and I kept going back and forth, like maybe not even put, maybe I won't even put snipers in this cuz I don't know, I don't know that I need them. You know what I mean? So I think they're just in the list right now, but I don't know that they're necessarily needed for you to win almost.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And I didn't mean that to argue you. I was just saying it's just I understand what you're saying.
I'm deeply offended and can't believe I came on this
You should
podcast.
be. Now get off. No. But it's just something I've been thinking about lately. Like really, especially on the Rebel strike teams because it's one white, one black. So I'm like, they're not even. I mean, they're effective for board control, but not really for killing. So it's just an interesting thought that I think you could run a list without them. And that's kind of what I meant with like the meta's all over the place. I don't think there is a true meta.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's move on to terrain. So I know we promised this early on, and so right now, from this point on, it's all the terrain all the time for the rest of this podcast. So,
Sounds good.
the first thing I think I'd like to talk about is let's talk about let's turn to your blog. So imperialdiscipline.blog. I think this was December 18th, roughly. That yes, I'm looking at it now. December 18th. That you had this wonderful post about turning toys into terrain. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I wrote two articles in December that were sort of both aimed at the holiday spirit. Like you're probably getting some toys or money right now. What can you do with them? And the first one was a big holiday buying guide for people who were new to Legion. But the second one, like I said, was turning toys into terrain. I felt like there had been tons and tons of posts over the months since Legion's debut about which toys worked well, but I hadn't really seen a comprehensive list of which toys people were using and what people were doing with them. And so I wanted to give a primer on what was going on. So I think I had 5 or 6 actual toys. The first one I started with was that beautiful U-wing. That I know there's one board I've seen where the wing is broken off and it's over a river and units can use it as a ramp and it looks so cool. And then there's some sort of asynchronous ones like the sequel A-wing and the TIE SF, but I got the Rogue One TIE Striker. It's sitting up on my bookshelf right now. I beat it up pretty good with some paint and some nails. And I think there's just a lot of options out there, whether it's those big toys, whether it's, finding an ATSD or maybe just like a dirt cheap airspeeder on Legion scale and just taking a hammer to it or, really messing it up, or even using some of the old X-Wing stuff. I've got all these X-Wing toys that I don't use a ton anymore. And I painted one up like a hologram and I think it looks pretty nice. So I'm always looking for interesting ways to utilize things that may not make the most sense up front as.
Yeah, and I would say so I guess maybe not as old, but the AT-ATs from the Power of the Force or the Kenner line are all to scale for the most part. And so
Yeah, I've heard those AT-ATs are good, and then the what Disneyland popcorn bucket AT-ATs I think are
yeah,
also
so I
really
have
good.
both. Okay, so I'll
Oh,
I'll give
nice.
you I'll give you my feedback on it. The popcorn buckets are great. My only problem with them is that they're a little small. So they feel a little out of scale comparatively. Because once you get so what I did was I went on eBay and I bought a lot for the 80s AT-AT for it was $60 and it has a bunch of broken parts and all this crap, but it came with an extra leg. And so I once I got that and saw the scale of that one just makes way more sense from the scale of the game.
Yeah, that's definitely. There's really not much that's right on that 144 scale. But I was reading a great article doing my research about how if there's something that's a little small, the best thing you can do with it is make it wreckage. Make the ATST legs just barricades or something. If you can spread it out a little bit, it masks a bit of the deficiency.
Yeah, agreed completely. And that's, I got those popcorn buckets and I think that's what I'm going to end up doing is cutting them in half or something, and doing some
Yeah.
neat stuff with that. Yeah, and then I think outside of toys, you have those I think Bandai and their 172 scale. Bandai has a bunch of models, 172 scale. I've seen them I've seen them at hobby stores, but then I also we have a Think Geek store here in Syracuse, and I went in there and they had them on for like 50% off, and so I bought like 5 of them because I was like, okay,
Nice.
um, they're smaller, right? Because they're 172 versus 144 scale, but I think they really work um, for wreckage, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. One of the guys in our local scene, Daniel, has the RZ2 A wing, which I think is Bandai. Maybe I'm making that up, but just again, despite it being in the wrong era, it looks super good on the table.
Yeah, and I know the other company was Revell, right? They have a bunch of
Oh yeah, maybe
models
that's
as
what it is.
well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know which one, but yeah, so Revell has like an A-wing, and I believe they have an X-wing that's like 144 scale. So they're and they have they actually have an ATST that's about the same size as the game ATSTs, and it's a little bit cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oddly enough, Lego sets are real good scale too.
Oh yeah, I did see that too. Yeah.
I just finished building a Lego TIE fighter,
Hmm.
and I looked at my Legion stuff, and it's like a hair big, but really not that bad. And so I'm like, oh well, in Lego sets you can kind of just break, right, if you need them to be destroyed or not. So I think next time I've got T-70, a T-65, and a TIE fighter I might bring.
Nice. That's a good idea.
That is a
Yeah, I
really
mean you
good
just
idea.
snap them together, right? Like who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so that's for like vehicles and wreckage type stuff. I did like your idea. So Kevin on his blog, like he said, he was taking X-wing miniatures that he wasn't using anymore, and he painted them to look like holograms. And I liked them for like objective markers. Like I really liked that idea.
Yeah, I had this weird idea when I first was getting into Legion that I was going to paint my Imperial army normal and my Rebel army like holograms, just, some like in universe thematic like training room scenario. But I ended up never doing that. And so I was so excited when I finally had an excuse to do it. The paint scheme is so easy, with just a little bit of blue and then some lighter blue and then white. That's all you need. And it definitely is sort of a cool way to replace, just the cardboard objective tokens you get with the core set.
So this is just a weird idea that I just had. I just realized, I wonder, because of the scale of Fantasy Flight's Imperial Assault game, I wonder if you could take some of the miniatures from that, paint them up like holograms, and use them as objectives as well.
I'm sure you could. I actually have the R2D2 and C3PO ally pack and had been using them as objectives for the first couple of months of the game. Now the bases are smaller than the actual cardboard tokens, so if you're a stickler about that kind of thing, you'll want to mount them. But they're a little small. I know Imperial Salt isn't quite. I forget what the exact scale is. A little smaller. But when they're objective markers, they look fine. I think they're definitely, especially for R2 and C3PO, really great, easy to paint objective markers.
Yeah. All right. So next, okay, let's talk about, let's talk about purchasing terrain.
Mm-hmm.
Since Shawn's going to be on in a little bit, he's mostly focused on making terrain.
Yeah,
So I
Shawn is
thought
the
it'd be
king of making
uh,
really cool stuff. I've done a little bit on my blog, but he's so creative.
yeah, and it's ridiculous. And like you'll hear him when he talks during the interview, but the interview was pre-recorded, but like I've had just conversations where he and I have just talked about terrain like on the phone or something, and just he'll just come up with a random idea, and you're like, where did that come from, man? He's like, I don't know, we were talking and you said something about this, so I was like, holy crap. And he's like, I already know how I would do this. I'd get this supply, this supply, this supply, and it'd all be done. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, Shawn's got a
that's
gift.
yeah. And he just, I don't know, as Evan says with some of our friends with games, he can just see into the matrix with with terrain. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so anyway, so with him coming on talking about terrain, making terrain, I thought this would be a good time to talk about all right, let's say you don't have the time or the skills or the wherewithal to build your own terrain. So you're going to go buy some terrain. So where do you go? So Kevin, I'll let you, if you got one, I'll let you go first. And do you have, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have one, but go ahead.
I've actually never ordered 3D printed terrain, and that's primarily because I don't really have easy access to a 3D printer. Although one of the guys in our local scene, TG, has like a bucket full of what I believe is Imperial terrain. Don't quote me on that, but that's actually sort of a sticking point for me. I'm really looking forward to the day that FFG decides to make maybe not like necessarily big set pieces like Warhammer has, but at least some scatter terrain that's thematic. I feel like not having official options for that is a little bit of a bummer, although there are plenty of good third-party options.
I would buy a like a Hoth set or an Endor set, like a bunker set, an official stuff. Even if it came with cool like alt objective cards, in a heartbeat. Like if they just put out that with their soft plastic, so who cares? You throw it in a bin, whatever. You don't have to worry about how fragile it is. I'd be all over that if they released it.
Yeah, give me a good 6x3 mat that is thematic and some scatter terrain or just like small set pieces to go with it. I'd snap them up in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I mean, what's their deal with still trying to sell 3x3 mats for this game? It's driving me nuts.
It at least made somewhat sense when they had two matching 3x3 ones for like the desert one, and then they've got the new 3 individual sets for pre-order, and they look very pretty. But I have no desire to buy these sort of repeating 3x3 squares.
And the worst part is they've got my buddy has the grass mats for the Rune Wars game, and they're pretty good. And I bought their Legion ones, and man, I hate them because it's like terrain built onto it, right? So how do you play that, right? It's supposed to just look cool, but it just doesn't work. So I tried using it as an X-Wing mat. I'm like, well, maybe it looks like you're flying over like a destroyed area, and you can't see the obstacles. I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with these. I guess if my car breaks down, they're cool, like sleeping bag like blankets, but that's about it.
Yeah, there's something to be said for them not overcommitting too much and taking away from the really genuinely very good sculpts we've gotten for the minis. But it feels sort of like they've got their foot half in, and I'd really like to see them either just commit and do some cool stuff or back out and find some other way to support it.
Yeah, I'm sure they're gonna get there. It's just it seems like they're almost there too because of they supply terrain for like Adepticon and stuff and for
Right.
Nova. So I mean, it's like they're kind of there already, right?
One more hope.
Yeah. But anyway, so along the lines of buying terrain, here's some recommendations I have. You got Dan Wolf Games.
Yeah.
He did a lot of the 3D terrain for Tabletop Simulator, and then he's got a website, danwolfgames.com, where you can go buy like the Cloud City type 3D terrain, and then I think he has like Jagged Brush Studios that'll paint them too. They partnered up so you can get painted ones as well. And I believe he sells the STL files as well. So Dan Wolf Games, he's got a ton of good stuff. This is just 3D stuff. Then you got imperialterrain.com. They have tons and tons of stuff, and you can get the printed or you can get the STL files. So if you got a 3D printer, you can print them yourself, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's real nice.
There's gosh, the name is escaping me right now, but there's another 3D printed, and he does the like the legs of the walkers of the AT-ATs and the TIE fighter. They're all 3D printed. Shoot, I wish I could remember the name right now. It'll come to me. If it doesn't, I don't know. Whoever it is, you can yell at me. Telling me what a terrible community person I am for not remembering this. But so
I know Toshi Station has some pretty good like scatter terrain too, like some of the classic chests and like Tatooine gateways and stuff.
Yep. And then okay, so then that's kind of the 3D printed stuff. Then 2 recommendations I have. There's this company out of Poland, Micro Art Studio. They're amazing. I just ordered, and I just got it delivered not too long ago, an entire Tatooine like building set, and they make it out of like a like it's almost like a weird foam type. And that stuff it wasn't crazy expensive, and it was really easy to paint, and it's light, and it looks amazing.
Yeah.
Then the other places, and this so they have Legion specific terrain. Now, the other place that I like, and this is old school. I used to play this game called Infinity. It was a tabletop war game, more like a skirmish game than what we're playing in Legion. But they have tons of buildings and stuff, and like they're in a futuristic setting. The game is so there's this site called Warsenal, and it's WARSEN.AL, and they do MDF terrain, so it's all woodcut terrain, and it's beautiful stuff, and it's relatively cheap to get into. If you want a building or two, and there's tons of futuristic stuff, and it doesn't come painted or anything, so you can, if you don't like the paint job that they do for it, and you want to make it more Star Wars focus, it's really easy to do, and I have a ton of their stuff too.
Awesome. I know there's a lot of, oh man, maybe y'all can help me think of the name. It's an Etsy store, I think, that does the holograms and objective markers. And they do like advertisements.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I have
Imperial Lightworks, is that what it is?
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I always love seeing those on boards. I think they do a good job of making like sort of fun, or Besh stuff and photos. I really enjoyed when I've seen their stuff on the table.
Yeah, and I want to say the other one, the one I was thinking of was Legion Terrain Store, maybe off of Etsy. They do 3D printed stuff too. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Like I'm looking at, yeah, right here, Legion Terrain Store. They're on Facebook. They have Legion legionterrain.com. There it is. Got it. Got them. Legionterrain.com. They do a ton of, so these other guys that we were talking about do a lot of like buildings and different obstructions and objects and stuff. Legionterrainstore.com has like half buried Imperial walker heads, like Imperial,
That's
yes,
it. Yeah.
the legs, the crashed TIE fighter, the crashed X-wing, like all this stuff.
And the down pilots too,
Yes,
right?
yes, and I've seen them, and
Yeah.
they're really, really good.
Man, I'm gonna have to write all these down. I really don't own any good terrain for myself, and partially that's living in New York City and not having any space for it whatsoever. But I keep thinking of these things, and there's a lot of good stuff being made out there.
Yeah, don't worry, I got them all bookmarked. I'll send them to you after the podcast.
Excellent. Thank you.
And then the other thing is really if you just toss a search up on Etsy and you write in Legion Terrain or Legion anything really, there's a million stores out there like selling stuff that you can find. So go check that
Yeah.
out. And I know Legion Terrain, that guy, he's on there. And I'm sorry, dude. Reach out if you listen to the podcast and tell me your name. It's hard. I'm sorry. There's a lot of people with pseudonyms on a line that I don't know. But that's the funny thing. So just a like weird, strange topic here. So when we went to like PAX and stuff, and when I've been out in person at some of these things, like people introduce themselves with their real name, and they'll be like, "Hey, man, remember that conversation we were having about XYZ?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know a Bob. Like, I don't know any Bobs." And he's like, "Oh no, like my name's this, like GroggyDog on on the Discord channel." And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, man, what's up?" Like, because I've never, like, I don't know, I don't think you ask for people's first names as much as you used to, right?
I'm about to send Orchimedes a jacket for him to wear at Las Vegas Open. Couldn't tell you what his first name is, if I'm being honest.
It's Kyle.
Is it Kyle? Good.
Yeah.
Hi, Kyle. Hope you're listening.
So if you listen to their podcast this week, the three notorious scoundrels have decided that they're going to start going by their real names. So if you listen, you'll catch their real names. So yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And then I'm trying to think what else. So Yeah, I think other things you can do. Now, I know that this is a little bit more expensive, and I know not everybody can do this, but I had a couple ATSTs for the game, so I just turned one into terrain. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's yeah.
I actually up on our YouTube channel, I did a whole video of how I turned it into terrain. So you can go check that out. Other things that you could do too, Warhammer 40K, like the kits that they put together, there's some stuff that's not very like Warhammer specific, but they have like pipes or like old ruins and stuff that kind of look like old Jedi temples. So you can get those at whatever store sells GW stuff.
They've got some really
Those
good like shipping containers that would fit in perfectly on a Scarif board too.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of options. Evan, can you think of anything else out there that you've seen that would be good?
For terrain.
Yeah.
I mean, not really. We've been using. There's a couple guys like Terrain Done Easy that you take like CDs and you throw like whatever your solvent glue is on them. Then you throw whatever terrain or flock and a couple trees on it, and they make these great little like spot terrain pieces.
Oh, that's
Uh,
smart.
yeah, right. And it's easy. You can just put like a lake on one. Like you just put the water effect on one. You can get it at like an AC Moore kind of thing.
Yeah,
And it's like a little pond, or you've got little tree areas, and those are great for like that cover terrain, not cover terrain, but area terrain, or anything like that. Those are great, and plus you can just throw them in a box, and who cares? My biggest hope for terrain is I don't really know a whole lot of good places to get it. Like you, Jay, I was getting into Infinity for a while, and I backed out, and then now it looks like I might be getting into it again. So yeah, there's a group that really likes it. That one of our friends is really amazing at making terrain. We should probably talk to him at some point. Uh, and he makes all of his own handmade stuff, and it's really crazy. He says he wants to open a store, but you know how that goes, right?
Yeah.
So but for terrain, I was actually, like I said, like Legos sound goofy, but I was just building that thing and I put it down. I'm like, man, I could do whatever I want with this. But my goal is to just get terrain I can throw in like a bucket and it can get beat up in the back of my car, and I don't have to feel like it's like I have to treat it as well as my miniatures.
Yeah, well, if you're throwing it in a bucket in the back of the car, you're treating it exactly like your miniatures.
Hey, they are soft plastic and they work fine. I
That's
kind of gave the
Evan's
ball
claim to
hope.
fame. I
Just
can't
the
wait.
bucket. Yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I can't wait to see you at Adepticon. Like, I'm making you a bucket for Adepticon. You just, because Evan's whole thing, yeah, Evan's whole thing is that he wants to come and just scrape his arm across the table, and all his miniatures go into a bucket, and he just walks away with a bucket and a beer. So,
always gotta have that easy out. Always gotta have the easy out.
Shucks, that's a good looking army. Gee whiz, I hope Mondo's okay. Dumps bucket on the table. Here's my list. After done, handshake. Hey, great game, partner. Arm scoop our army into bucket. Plop. All right, where's my next game at? Gee whiz, there's a lot of pieces in this game.
yeah.
But
So yeah, I'm gonna make that for you. I've decided. It's done. It's happening.
Excellent. I gave up. So I used to have like I still all jokes aside, I do keep them in a nice like bag, but I really got disheartened when
I'm glad that you prefaced bag with nice. That was operative.
a real nice plastic bag I got down at the store. It was a really good deal. I got this. I bought like a nice miniature bag for them, and then they were in the back of my car over the summer. And then every weapon I had melted, like they all droop. And so my lightsabers, all my DLTs, like these weren't in direct sun; they were just in the back. And so after that, I just kind of like all bets are out the window. as long as they're still like game legal, we're in, boys. So I'm glad you kind of got glue together. He's getting a little wiggly wobbly, but yeah, no. If I could just get an Adepticon slot bucket, I'd be pretty happy with that. If it could have cup holders off the sides, also good.
You got it, like with little straws into a helmet for you.
Perfect.
Oh my god, that's perfect.
I'm a podcaster.
But all right, so do you guys have any other topics on terrain before we get to Shawn's interview?
Nah, man, I'm good.
Yeah, I think I've said my piece.
Okay, so we're going to move into Shawn's interview. Stay tuned. And now I'm joined by Shawn Morris of TheTerrainStudio. He also runs the Star Wars Legion Terrain group on Facebook. How's it going, Shawn?
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So good to have you on. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the opportunity, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for maybe some people, I'm sure most of our audience knows who you are, but for some of our people out there that maybe don't, want you to tell them a little bit about your terrain background and what got you into Legion terrain?
Okay, cool. Well, I've been making terrain for about 11 years now or so. I kind of came about it in a weird sort of way. So I did a lot of modeling, just like 35 scale modeling when I was younger. Basically, I just went down to the basement, built a bunch of models just to kind of kill time in the summers. And then I eventually started making a bit of scenery stuff. I kind of got into trains for a while. I was always kind of, into the whole scale model train layout type deal. I like the scenery aspect more than I like the trains, as it turned out. So I sort of went down that route. I like to do things on a micro scale. Like I write really small, and I always like to, draw really small. I kind of like that small scale. So I got into 15 millimeter primarily. So I did a lot of Flames of War gaming. I got into gaming kind of through that as well, and I built that terrain for a long time, probably like a good 9 or 10 years. So I really like the scale. Um, it's really fun. It was more a historical gaming, obviously, so a lot more scenery elements, a little less sort of sci-fi. So I was able to use kind of natural things around, landscapes, things like that. I did a lot of traveling when I was younger and into my adulthood as well. So always kind of got inspired by things that I saw around. Of course, I was always a Star Wars fan as well. So when I had the opportunity to kind of, link up my love for Star Wars and my terrain building for a tabletop miniatures game, it was pretty organic, but it came together, and then I started building Legion terrain and sort of just transitioned into primarily just that at this moment. So
Yeah, and so my understanding is even before like the Legion terrain, you've been doing how-to videos and kind of showing people how you get to your end product, right? For a while now.
yeah, I pretty much started making videos right from the time I actually started building. So it was kind of like a sort of learning by putting it out there. So kind of the feedback that I got, the comments that I got, I would ask questions kind of in my own videos to kind of elicit responses. And I had I'm really, kind of not super proud of the first work that I did, but at the time I was quite proud of it. And the progression to kind of getting better, using more tools, different products, that sort of thing has been sort of a natural learning curve for me. I've used inspiration from other people, obviously, around the the internet and YouTube and things like that. But I kind of speak as if I'm not necessarily doing a real structured how to, but I'm doing it like this is physically what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll show the really boring stuff, like, hey, this is how you get gravel from outside and prepare for a tabletop. So it might be a video of me washing rocks and just sort of talking, or cutting foam for an hour or so, and just kind of boring stuff, but it's all part of the process. And one of the things I maintain is a transparency in the builds, that I really don't like videos where you see a guy assemble some materials and then 30 seconds later it's just end product. I really like to be transparent with the builds, and they may take several months of videos, but it's more in terms of the reality of what terrain making is. It doesn't just happen in an hour. You don't get a masterpiece after 5 minutes. So that's one of the things I've always aspired to have in all my videos.
Yeah, and I guess to that, like, I find that there's this weird middle ground, right, between because a lot of us, I mean, this isn't our full-time job, like playing Star Wars Legion, right? So we need to figure out how can we build terrain in the amount of time that we have. And so have you found, like, I know that some of the stuff you do is on the higher end and it's going to take time because you like all the detail stuff. But have you found like some techniques or some tricks of the trade that could get someone in between? So like let's say I only have a few hours to build, some terrain for my Star Wars stuff. Is there options out there for people?
I think one of the things people have to first get in their mind is their expectation. So if you only have a few hours, don't expect to have a piece that looks like showcase quality. And that's not to say that everything needs to be that, but I think that understanding managing your expectations are a big thing, because if you go in with huge expectations, you're going to constantly be disappointed, which means you're probably going to be discouraged, which means you probably stop doing things. And that's one of the things I really try to tell people to not be. So you can start with dollar store materials, you can start with high-end tools, you can pick the middle ground. So I think there's a few things that most hobbyists should probably be familiar to work with. I talk a lot about working with pink foam or foam core. Now, if you don't have access to pink foam, and it's pretty expensive, I think this morning I spent about $250 on sheets of foam, which some people that might be an entire table's worth of their budget, right? So you don't have to go there. You can go to the dollar store. You can start with foam core stuff. If you want to work with glues, you can buy dollar store glue guns and things like that. So I think that one of the things people need to make sure that they do is gather some materials together before you start. And one of the things I often do is I actually do the build kind of in my head. I kind of go through the motions even sometimes with my hands. I'm kind of physically mapping out what I want to do, because if you just start whacking things together, that's not going to give you a nice product. You're not going to end up with something conducive in the end. But if you really kind of think about it, and if you experiment, I do test pieces for almost everything that I do, how materials react with another material, how things go together, what kind of dry times. I figure out all that stuff before I really get into a project. And the videos are kind of what I do to help people with that, because you don't want to necessarily sit down and do all that stuff. But I think really experimenting, but also looking ahead at what you want to make is going to help you out. So don't just sit down and try to whack something together. You're going to be disappointed every time.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. All my experiences have been like that too, like trying like a lot of the experimenting first. And then like for people out there down here in the States, like you could go to Home Depot and Lowe's and they have I believe it's 2 foot by 2 foot of that foam, of the pink foam, and I think sometimes it's blue, for them, but it's not terribly expensive to get the 2 foot by 2 foot. So like if you're doing like smaller pieces, that's it's like $5 or something for it. So
Yeah, I think one of the things too, and I've kind of learned these things all along the way. If you're going for a nice crisp piece of foam, then yeah, probably grab it off the shelf. But if you actually ask the people in the hardware, the lumber sections about like either offcuts or broken pieces of foam, like they can't sell that broken foam. So they'll often have like a bin of just basically scraps or giveaway stuff. And if you ask, it only takes one question. You can generally end up with some of that stuff for free. You're going to take it home and hack it up anyway, probably go at it with a knife and make all kinds of weird shapes anyway. So that's just a nice cheap way of finding some things. So it doesn't really work often for me because I'm looking for those crisp corner kind of things. But someone just starting out, that's another great cost savings for you.
So, in let's stick with foam since we're talking about it. What are some tools as far as cutting? Like, I know that there's the hot wire tools, and what kind of knives or like shaping tools are people looking at to work with that type of foam?
So the best tool that I can recommend is actually called a Proxon hot wire cutter. It's reasonably priced. You can usually get it on Amazon for like 100, $120, somewhere in that range. And it's pretty much my go-to tool. It's very simple to operate. It gives you really nice clean cuts. You can do circles with it. You can do all kinds of oblong shapes. You can do angle cuts with it, 45, 60s, whatever you want to do if you want to kind of put pieces together. So that's a really nice tool. But I would say this: you don't need a Proxon foam cutter to cut with foam. You really just need a knife. And here's my one recommendation: sharp blades. If you try to get at polystyrene with a dull knife, it's just going to end up kind of chewing the foam, and you'll get that kind of real jagged look. But a really clean cut knife, and you do your cuts, basically control your depth. So 3 cuts to get through is fine. A lot of people try to cut through a 2-inch piece of foam with one swipe. It's not going to happen, and you'll be disappointed again. So gradually cutting through is one thing. Sharp knife, that's really all you need to work with foam. And another thing people may not think about is is sandpaper and a rasp. So a wood rasp works really good for gouging foam. If you want to make a nice sort of roughed up shape, a nice rock structure, a rasp is one of the tools that I use. They're like $6, and I can shape a nice mountain or a cliff face in 5 minutes using a rasp, and that's all I need.
Yeah, that's super cool. But I guess I would to add to that, like, depending on what kind of shape you're looking for, sometimes that dull knife to get the rough edges isn't terrible either.
Yeah, I guess I should preface that with saying when you're looking to cut your foam into shape, sharp knife. If you're looking to gouge and make rock faces, one of the things you can do, you can still use a sharp knife, but you'll actually want to use more of a stabbing motion, and you just angle your cut. So if you do a 45 to the left and a 45 to the right, and then you actually use your thumb to actually pick out the piece. Your thumb is a great tool for actually making rock surfaces.
So, moving on to like Star Wars Legion, more of Star Wars Legion focused stuff. Have you had any experience using like any of these other scaled, models, or have you been kind of building your own stuff?
Um,
Do you know what I'm talking about with
oh,
like the different like TIE
yeah, yeah,
fighters and the X-wings and stuff?
like the
Yeah.
Bandai kits and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, well, originally when I was doing a table for Star Wars, the first one I did, the Endor table, I started that about maybe 3 or 4 months before release of the game. And so I was really guessing at scale and things like that. So we kind of, you were probably around. There was all kinds of speculation. Is it 35 mil? Is it 28 mil heroic? Is it 28 mil straight? Is it O scale? There's all kinds of talk. And O scale is 148 basically. So when that was happening, I kind of picked I went down kind of down the middle, and I grabbed the Bandai kit, the 1 to 148 scale ATST, which looks very close to the model we eventually had. So I kind of used that as basically my frame of reference for the entirety of the table. So I had some of the Wizards of the Coast Star Wars figs, and I knew they were probably a little underscale. So I basically used a couple reference points to frame out the rest of the table. So, you're guessing at door heights and things like that. But one of the nice things about space in general is that oversized things aren't necessarily out of place. There's lots of things that are huge and, that sort of stuff. And when you're working with grasses and sort of trees, obviously Endor has out of scale trees. So you had a lot of wiggle room there. Um, Now that the game is out, though, a lot of the terrain that I'm making is very structured to the scale, not only to the scale but to the bases. With the non-overlapping rule where the base needs to fit. If you're making any sort of platforms or structures, or if you want to talk about cohesion of units and being all in the same level and not on different levels, you kind of have to factor that all in. So some of the elements that you make terrain-wise may look a little bit different based on the fact that you have to operate around the base structure of the figures.
Yeah, I remember those days. It was like the Wild West, man. Like everybody, it was no one knew what was to scale, and everybody's like freaking out. And when somebody would find something, they they'd shout it from the rooftop, and then that would like the price of that would skyrocket on all the websites and everything because it was really hard to find.
I really like the photos that were coming out, that where people were kind of trying to extrapolate, like, like, oh, look, there's a banana in the background, and if we just kind of scale this up and down, we can kind of figure out how tall this guy is. And there was all kinds of like graphics people were making, and it was pretty entertaining to kind of see. They were measuring. Luke Skywalker, I think, was basically the frame of reference to everything. So it was pretty fun to watch that sort of evolution of scale unfold.
Yeah, and I think it gave a lot of us like a real idea on what the kind of like excitement was going to be around this game, just like when people were just talking about terrain and how excited everybody was getting, that was in turn exciting, right, for us to be like, oh man, this game's going to go real far.
Yeah, one of the things I was quite disappointed with, like on a personal level, when I was building the Endor table, was that I didn't have figs in hand. So the premise of that was that I was getting that to the customer so that he could have the table on release day. So when he brought course at home, he could play on the table. So of course I couldn't be disappointed that he was happy, but I really did want to see kind of how close that table ended up in scale. Like what did the figs actually look like on that table? So of course now when I'm building things, I have figs, but that was one of the things I kind of regretted, is not having that table to kind of see how close we nailed the scale on that.
Yeah. So, I think the next thing I'd like to talk about, so for anyone who hasn't joined the Legion Terrain group, you absolutely should. And one of the things I want to talk about, Shawn, is like we have there's 5,700 and some odd members now, and like every day there's something cooler than the day before that somebody posts up there. I love that group so
Yeah,
much.
I originally started when Legion first came out, like there was a lot of groups springing up, and of course there was already the Legion page. And one of the things that I was, a lot at the outset of the game, there wasn't a bunch of terrain. People weren't making a bunch of things. But like I said, I got started about 6 months before the game, maybe 5 months before the game came out, and so I wanted a place to post things. And so I started making that, and then basically I've sort of jump back from posting a lot of things, and people have just taken over. Like you said, there's a post there every day, multiple times a day. Not only that, but there's like 10 to 15 people joining every day. Like I'm constantly hitting approve on those membership requests, and I've been impressed. And I put lots of posts up about how impressed I am with the group. There's never any fights, there's no criticisms on there. There's a ton of support. People ask a question, people post. It's a great community on there.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it's one of those things that it's one thing to see guys like you who I'd classify as on the professional level of some of this terrain stuff, but then it's also really great to see like the Joe Schmoes like myself with terrain, and we're like, oh man, this might work. And then you put it up there, and then somebody takes what you did and takes it to the next level. Like it's an incredible group.
Some of my favorite posts are when somebody puts up either like they got styrofoam for because they got a new TV or electronic device, or they just came home from some sort of fast food place and they got some random takeout container, and then they basically say, "I got this, go." And then the comments about what you can make out of that stuff. Those are some of the best posts on there because the stuff people come up with is like, God, I just didn't see that when I looked at it, but you know what, that's kind of the beauty. And those are sort of those found materials that I often talk about in videos as well, that you don't need to go out and buy anything to make terrain. You may need a few things here and there, but walking down the aisle of a dollar store, like I said, look for things not what they are on the shelf but what they could be when you get them home. And we've talked about kind of those making things on a cheap budget kind of thing. And just because you have a cheap budget doesn't mean you're going to make cheap terrain. You can make really cool things with stuff that cost almost no cash at all, which is one of the best parts about this scale. It's hard to do that in small scale stuff because things don't translate well. But in 28 mil, like this scale for Legion, things just seem to find a way to work for you.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just and then and then people with also like the advent of cheap 3D printers now too, right? Has really just opened up a whole new ball game for terrain building as well.
Yeah, you can do. I don't have a 3D printer, and I kind of I think we had this conversation. I have this conversation all the time. I love what people do with 3D printers, and I'm a proponent of using 3D printed parts. Just for me, I like to try to make as much one-off stuff as possible. So if I have something that I need to replicate, a particular part that I need to have consistently throughout a build, then I'll use a 3D printed part. But to kind of sit down and just use 3D printed skeletons all the time is kind of opposite what I'm doing. And I think the two can exist perfectly fine. There's no, we're parallel in terms of what we can do. Same thing with found materials, right? You can use something that was a structure and make it something else. So I think that there's enough to go around. I don't think one is going to replace the other ever, because I think what's going to happen is people are going to see 3D printed things and say, yeah, I like that. I don't want to necessarily have that exact thing on my table, because then every table ends up looking kind of the same. But for consistency wise, or let's say a tournament and want to have really balanced and even tables, I think 3D printed stuff's awesome. Not to mention the 3D printed buildings that are out there are incredible. The scratch build something of a similar quality can happen, but to replicate that or to do that on a consistent basis is not really feasible. People are going to get, again, discouraged if you have to sit down and kind of replicate, a Tatooine hut, or a landing platform or something like that. It's just not something that the average terrain builder is going to want to sit and do. So
Yeah, I would agree with you. With things that I've built in the past, it's like a healthy mix. I think what you do is you build up all these techniques over the years. Like I have a 3D printer. I've built things out of styrofoam and out of foam board. But I think what you do is you have all these techniques at your disposal, and then you just kind of look at what's A, going to fit your time, and B, fit the project, right? And sometimes, yeah, creating 3D printed for, like, let's say 30% makes sense, but then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I need this to have a little bit more of a hand feel to the creation.
yeah, like if you're trying to make something, let's say a pond or a tree stand, or maybe a rocky outcrop or something like that, those really lend more towards the handmade structures. If you're looking for some sort of hovel or home, or let's say a mechanical shop or something along those lines, like something really structural, in shape, then those real clean lines, those removable roofs, all those things are much easier to produce on a 3D printer. So, like I said, I think the two have a place side by side. I don't think one replaces the other, or really is in competition with the other, to be honest.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's pretty much how I see it as well. Yeah. So, what else you got going on, man? We got the group. Oh, why don't you talk about your So Shawn has a great YouTube channel, and we were just talking about it. It's the Terrain Studio. When you go to search for it, no spaces
Nobody
in
got time for
between the
spaces.
trainers. So you can search him up there. He's got a ton of videos. So, and he kind of talks through different projects and different things he's looking, and then also you got a lot of stuff on the Terrain group on Facebook.
Yeah, so I do a lot of I try to do a lot of videos, and sometimes I just sort of do sit and work videos, which are boring for most, but they're the kind of thing where you can kind of sit in and sort of ask a question, and that's really the intent of those. I'm sitting and working anyway, so it's a lot easier to kind of chat and work than it is to kind of sit in silence. So when I'm doing those, I just usually say live video that
Join us
way.
next
So
week for
that's
another
really
edition
fun.
of the Fifth
Terrain
Trooper
building for me is very
podcast.
therapeutic. It's a nice balance from the day.
This has been a
I
Fifth
do a
Trooper
lot of
production.
hours pretty much every day after a full day of work. But that decompression time is something that I can't really measure. It's not a quantity that I can measure. It's it's very, for me, like I said, therapeutic. And to sit down and chat with people about terrain, the time flies by. Even if you're doing the most tedious or boring thing, or a monotonous task, um, it's always fun to kind of sit in studio and talk to people. One of the things that I've kind of got from it, is I do these sort of live videos with people who are kind of thinking about project or theorizing things, and we sit and talk. And as much as I'm giving them information and inspiration, I'm getting that right back. And that's something I get out of the terrain group as well. So just talking about a project, working through a problem, or theorizing what you may or may not be able to do, is something, again, really fun on the terrain side of things. And it's different than gaming. You're not talking tactics or strategy. You're talking aspirations and inspiration, that sort of thing. So
All right. So wrapping up here a little bit, what do you got, like, could you give us, I know this is always tough, but I like doing this because it's fun. Could you give us, like, your top, let's say, top 5 tools for terrain building? What do you got for me?
tools or products? What are we talking?
Well, heck, let's do both.
Okay.
Give me your top 5 tools and then your top 5 products.
Okay, products is easy because I did a Patreon video on this, and this is like the 5 that you need if you are working in terrain. So it's really easy. So the first one is Vallejo acrylic paste. It's great. It comes in a multitude of colors. It works as a basing material. It works as an adhesive. It works as a texturizing. So Vallejo earth paste. Second, Woodland Scenic Cement. It's basically just a watered down glue. It's a little bit different than that, but it's a very thin glue that you can use to adhere a lot of sort of organic materials, your flocks, your sands, that sort of stuff. That's easy. Clump foliage, also by Woodland Scenics or other companies as well. It's a sort of a clumped foam. It works for bushes. It works for you can make smoke or flame out of it, and it also works great for trees or ground cover. So that's 3. Fourth is you're going to want to have some sort of adhesive. So I like Weld Bond glue. It works awesome. It's a really thick PVA that you can actually water down and use in a very similar fashion to the scenic cement. So that's it. And then my other one would be I use Vallejo wash. It's a sepia wash. The wash is amazing. It's actually an immersion dip, and you can use it for staining. You can use it for inking. You can use it for adding depth to ground cover. You can splash it on and use it as a weathering effect. Also amazing. So those products, why I like them is because they're versatile and I use them for about 5 or 6 different things each. None of them are single-handedly used for one purpose for me. So that's that. So then we're going to talk about tools. So I'll kind of go on the extreme ends of things that are expensive, things that are cheap. So hot wire foam cutter, Proxxon cutter, I mentioned that. That'll be at the higher end of what you're going to buy for a hobby tool. So that foam cutter is absolutely amazing. Second, I talked about it already, but a wood rasp. You can use a rasp for a ton of things, foam work in particular, but it's great for creating craters or groundwork or roughing up surfaces that you want to add texture to. So absolutely great. Can't go wrong with the trusty X-Acto knife, of course. Sharp blades, make sure you replace them. People buy an X-Acto knife and it comes with one blade and they try to use that blade until basically the tip breaks off and it gets gouges and you can't use it. Buy a pack of replacement blades and then you'll know when your knife is dull, but a lot of people don't replace it, but get those blades. So that's kind of a 2-for-1 there. So item number 4 in terms of tools, what I like, you cannot go wrong with a protractor that has a ruler attached. So although I don't necessarily measure everything to an exact measurement, I use things that are going to be used as gauges. So using some sort of measurement tool, protractor works great because you can get nice rounded and angled out of that. So definitely have a protractor. And then last but not least, what I think in terms of a tool, I use a lot of tools, but I don't think you can go wrong with a pin vise. A pin vise is super. If you don't know what a pin vise is, basically it's just a small drill. It's a hand drill, but a pin vise is really good for not only pinning things, as the name would imply, but you can do a lot of a build strengthening with that. So cutting in holes into materials that you want to join together. So your adhesive is nice, but ultimately it's just a flat surface, big flat surface. But putting in toothpicks or metal pins and rods, those are instrumental in making a solid structure and giving it a lot more rigidity than just straight adhesive. So there you go. That's in a nutshell.
Well, I think that's all we got time for today. If you want to check out Shawn's stuff, like I said, YouTube, The Terrain Studio, no spaces. He also has a great Patreon page, patreon.com/The Terrain Studio. And you have all different availability of choose a how-to video, want to see something, the Patreons can at a certain level can decide what the next how-to video is going to be. So really recommend all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I do. I also have a section on there of what the third tier where I actually do a monthly sit down with people. I do a face-to-face chat, and we talk pretty much like we're doing now. I show products, show techniques. I sort of troubleshoot, help out with that. So a few of my patrons are on that level, and they really like that. They enjoy that sort of that face-to-face, and I do honestly as well. So I do recommend that level as well, just to try it out if people are unsure. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on here. So
so that was the interview with Shawn. He's such a cool dude. So nice to give us his time like that too.
Yeah, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, he's one of those really um, Okay, underrated people in the community. He puts so much work into his videos, and I was thrilled when he joined the Discord recently to get to interface with him. But go to his channel, go talk to him. He's incredible.
Yeah, and just tons of great information. He's got that Patreon page set up, and if you're really into custom building terrain, I'm not telling you how to spend your money, but he's got a Patreon level where he'll actually do a one-on-one session with you, like over Skype or something like that. If you're into terrain and you're really serious about it, I would strongly consider that. But
100% agree.
yeah, see, Evan agrees. So should you, stranger listening to this. But all right, so I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a real pleasure to talk to you guys.
You're the best. You are the best.
Oh, thank you.
So for everybody out there, if you didn't catch it earlier, that's imperialdiscipline.blog. You can also find him on the Discord channel and he watches the Twitch streams and antagonizes Endless with me on there as GroggyDog. And yeah, thank you so much again for joining. And everybody out there, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Have a great night, guys.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.